All right. Hello. Thank you for
Hello.
everyone for hi. Thank you for everyone for joining us. I just want to start out saying this is our very first live stream. So, we're kind of experimenting here and I hope everybody can see us. We are streaming to LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. So, yeah, like I said. So, this is going to be this is a podcast about telehealth and compounding pharmacies. And we're with Emily Hussey from Reed Smith. And the reason I have started this is I've heard a lot about telehealth and some of the complexities. And then Emily wrote this article. So I thought, what a great, Emily, come on in and tell us all about it. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I am Emily Hussey. I am counsel at Reed Smith. I'm in the Life Sciences and Healthcare group. And a lot of my work is focused on compounding pharmacies and the regulation related thereto. And I work with a lot of businesses that are either working in the pharmacy space or own compounding pharmacies. And so I'm I'm seeing a lot of the trends and changes that have happened in the past couple of years. So it's been interesting, and it's an interesting space to be in.
Excellent. So what prompted you to write this article? Can you tell us a story, or was there like a case that that piqued your interest, or you've been seeing a lot of things that made you write the story?
Yeah, so
The article?
it came about because, obviously, as everyone probably that's listening in knows, the, COVID pandemic prompted telehealth to really accelerate in a way that it probably would have been, 10 years from now. And now we're seeing things change rapidly. And what we were seeing was a lot of these, especially startup companies, were getting involved in, looking into the compounding space, whether it be working with either building their own compounding pharmacy or looking to work with compounding pharmacies to develop specialized medication. And what we were seeing was a lot of these companies really may not have had an understanding of essentially what they were getting into. And that, coupled with a lot of these big tech players, were starting to move into the pharmacy space in a way that really was not what they're originally supposed to do, right? I mean, you see Amazon, you've seen Walmart, which really didn't have a sort of a big healthcare platform, are now moving rapidly into the pharmacy space. And what we were seeing was kind of a leaping ahead without really getting the benefit of understanding the world that they're about to enter into.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we started the article, was just to say, hey, everybody, we understand all of the benefits that you're looking to achieve, but you need to kind of know the guardrails before you jump into this space.
So who are your clients then? Are they technology clients that you're seeing that are going wrong? Or are you seeing compounding pharmacies who are partnering with tech companies that are running into problems?
It can be both. So we're seeing it kind of from all facets. We're seeing it from companies that are, maybe startups looking to get into this space to develop these, precision medications with, working with compounding pharmacies. We're also seeing compounding pharmacies that are just kind of, trying to explain to these companies that they're working with the ins and outs of this space. And so it's a lot of, just back and forth and trying to kind of coordinate with everybody to make it a little more smooth if we can.
Right. Okay. Since our audience is, that audience is mostly compounding pharmacies, and the article was written mostly, it seems, for a general audience. What do you see? What are some of the pitfalls that you see that are specific to the compounding pharmacies? So if if they want to get involved, what do you think it is that they should be looking out for or researching more?
Yeah. So it's a couple of things. I think, if you're looking to get into, especially, and what I was primarily focused on, just to be clear, is really these telehealth companies, these telemedicine providers that are, for example, erectile dysfunction medication, skincare creams, things like that. If you're a compounding pharmacy that's looking to partner with a company like that, or kind of maybe even thinking about starting your own kind of side effort, exploring that option, one of the biggest things that we're seeing is, when it comes to telehealth providers or startups, really not recognizing what the regulations are. Also, primarily thinking of the doctor, the patient prescriber relationship, and then also the pharmacy's ability to navigate that, and how many of these startups really don't understand that it's not just the medical provider and the regulations that pertain to the medical provider and the patient. It's the pharmacy has its own rules and regulations relating to ensuring that there is a valid patient prescriber relationship, whether or not, I mean, a lot of these boards are really imposing that on pharmacies, whether that's really warranted or not. That's the space that we're in right now. And so for a pharmacy, when it's looking to potentially move into this space or partner with somebody, you need to be careful about making sure that you are navigating 50 different state regulations in terms of what they expect of the pharmacy, in terms of ensuring that there is a patient prescriber relationship. These regulations are woefully behind in terms of the, catching up to the space of technology. And so we're seeing a lot of boards are just kind of grasping at straws, going after pharmacies where, just because they're just trying to catch up, and their regulations just aren't really catching up to the pace of where things are going. So it's really on the pharmacy to kind of act as a backstop to make sure that they're making sure to comply with the regulations. They're doing what they need to do in terms of complying with all of the states where they're licensed in. And that's not just, necessarily navigating the patient prescriber relationship, but that extends to sometimes ensuring that the medical provider is licensed in the state where the pharmacy is dispensing the medication to. It's just things like that where it's across the board, where the startup or the person that you're working with may not necessarily know those regulations, and it's going to be on the pharmacy to make sure that people are paying attention to that.
You touched on so many hotspot issues, and it's funny, you talked about how, the MOUs and the hearing that's going on today, and it makes me wonder. And then you talked about the physician and making sure that the physician is licensed in the state where the pharmacy is, but you also mentioned having to be licensed in all 50 states. So, and then of course, in your article, you talked about the technology companies being aware of the federal rules, but not necessarily the state rules. So how does one navigate? What are the rules? Like, so if you've got a specific, and I'm assuming this is mostly towards 503As, not so much 503Bs, right?
Right.
If you've got but a lot of our 503As, they do have, regional or some national reach, especially through the mail order. So can a doctor in, California prescribe something to a patient in New Jersey?
Ooh, that is an interesting question. So I guess broadly speaking, it depends on the state. There have been waivers in place during the pandemic. It depends on if it's a controlled substance versus not. But in theory, a doctor should be able to prescribe a medication to someone in a state where they are not located in. However, there have been a lot of discussions about whether or not that doctor also needs to be licensed in the state where the patient is located. And even though the state regulations may not say one way or the other in that regard, frankly, most states, I believe, don't technically say that that the doctor needs to also be licensed in the state where the patient is located. A lot of state boards are still enforcing it that way. So, and then, even then, it's whose onus is it on to police that? And what you're seeing, really, you'd think it would be the doctors. The doctors have an obligation to make sure that they are licensed appropriately where they need to be. It is on the pharmacy to make sure that there is a valid patient-prescriber relationship, that they have an appropriate prescription with all the necessary information that complies with the, applicable rules and regulations of the state. However, boards are taking this extra step of placing the onus on the pharmacies to act as a backstop to double check a lot of these licensing, whether or not that should be required or not. But that's what we're seeing. And so it's causing a lot of extra headaches because it's not always possible for a pharmacy to have that information and have to double check that.
Yeah.
Not to mention, it requires the pharmacy to know a little bit more about how the treatment is occurring. For example, asynchronous versus synchronous telemedicine, whether or not the boards recognize one or both of those in the context of, assuming that a prescription is valid and then dispensing that prescription. So it's complicated is the easiest way to say it. It is complicated. Right
and I
now.
imagine that's one of those things that, everybody's going to be trying to catch up on because now everything, or as telehealth increases in popularity and the technology increases, there's going to be more cross state lines participation.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see. I think the next year is going to be interesting because states are really not going to have a choice but to try
Mhm.
to catch up to this and at least say one way or the other what their position is going to be, especially when it comes to synchronous versus asynchronous. I think
Can you just define synchronous versus asynchronous? I know
that's a
most people probably know, but I don't.
Yeah, no. So that's a great question. So synchronous is basically what we're doing right now, where you are talking, in
Mhm.
real time just to a doctor or prescriber. Asynchronous would be something where it's a little more truncated. For example, you might have a quick call on the phone, but then maybe there's some review of medical records, there's some emailing. It's a little bit more kind of multiple different ways in which the treatment occurs.
Mhm.
Synchronous is great for some things, but I think what the COVID pandemic showed that it's not great for all things. And so I could see a lot more movement into more of the asynchronous space. And I am not sure that boards have really caught up to how that works and how they can really, and basically kind of matching their regulations to the fact that asynchronous can still, you know, solicit a valid patient prescriber relationship, a valid treatment plan. I mean, so synchronous makes sense, but asynchronous, I think, is going to be a lot
Is
more common.
right. And you touched on personalized medicine, and that was one of the things I also wanted to ask you about. And I mean, obviously, compounding 503s is all about personalized medicine. But as
Mhm.
the medical industry progresses, and we talked a little bit about one of my conferences last year, is doing the or working more closely with doctors and having doctors actually integrated into the practice, or like having a space that you have a compounding pharmacy with a doctor's practice all in the same, in the same building. And we talked a little about what the legalities were and how to do that. But I'm wondering then, with the again, with telemedicine coming on, is that going to be able to make it easier for that kind of model to happen as we get past, just hormone therapies, and like you said, all the other things that you got, and get into more sophisticated personalized medicine? Do you think that there'll be an increased role for, I'm not
I
saying it well, but you know what I mean?
no, I know what you're saying. So I
And
think,
hopefully everybody is listening and knows what I mean. And also,
yeah,
you guys, anybody listening, you can put questions in the chat and we'll answer them.
yeah. So I think what makes me a little concerned, just from a legal perspective, would be pharmacies are not practicing medicine, nor should they be looked at as kind of delving into that space
Mhm.
because. And so, when I look at the potential possibility of a pharmacy and a doctor kind of joining hands a little bit more, that's what scares me. Not to mention that I shouldn't say scared. I think,
Yeah.
then it looks more like the practice of medicine more and more. And so how do you navigate that? Not to mention there are restrictions on physicians owning stake in pharmacies for the perfectly valid reason that it looks like you're kind of double dealing. You're just using your own pharmacy to kind of fill
Right. That it
prescriptions.
could look like you're just pushing drugs and things like that.
Exactly. So there's a lot of kind of issues there. Then again, we've seen companies that have used doctors as kind of more consultants, which I think is a different thing.
Mhm.
That's something that I think makes a little more sense, but I guess we'd have to kind of look. I guess we'll have to see what kind of happens because um, as we move forward, I think we're going to see more kind of this kind of trying to join hands. But the fact of the matter is that federal law and state law doesn't really match up with that right now. So you'd be in a risky position, I think.
Okay, great. Well, our podcasts are generally about 15 minutes. Do we have any parting thoughts on what you think people should be, that we haven't covered? Some of the questions. Are there questions that you get that we haven't addressed?
I think one of the things that I think I always like to say to either companies that are looking to get into this space or companies that are in this space and just trying to kind of expand options is that the regulations, both federal and state, are vague and have not caught up with the pace of technology. And what that means is there needs to be a general comfort in this space in kind of a gray area, living in
Mhm.
a gray space, because it's not black and white. There are risks. Those risks can be navigated. But if you're looking to get into a space where it's very easy, for example, FDA manufactured drugs, those regulations have been, hammered out for the past 30, 40 years. It is, exactly what you're getting into. You don't have that same feeling when you're getting into the compounding space. So it's important to understand that there may not be an answer, and there may not be an answer for a while, and that regulations are going to constantly be in flux. And so it's just, you have to pay attention. You have to have the right people at the helm that are navigating that with you and can advise you. And it's just, appreciate that, this is the space that you're in. So,
okay, excellent. I actually do have one more question. Sorry. And it has to do with the doctors. Do the doctors have to have a physical relationship before they can go into a telehealth relationship?
Again, that's very state specific.
Right. So basically they have to look into it. You can't just jump into maybe an association with the doctor over telehealth. They have to, you have to look into your state regulation.
Right. You'd want to be conscious of what the state regulations are to the extent it's at all possible, because it's not always clear.
Okay. And just to reiterate, if a telehealth company wants to partner with a 503A, then the 503A, I mean, who's the onus of making sure all these regulations are in place? Is it on the technology company or the pharmacy?
I would say the least risky approach was the onus should be on both, because it's not enough just for the telehealth company to police itself. It's or the telehealth, the whatever the startup is. The pharmacy needs to also ensure that it is protecting itself. So the least risky approach would be for everybody to just kind of make sure that they know the rules of the road.
Right.
On both sides. Yeah.
Kind of protect it. It's like protecting your brand. Make sure everything you're doing is in line with all the state regulations.
Right. And unfortunately I understand that it's a lot of work. It really is. But that's the really only way to do it at this point.
Okay. All right, thanks. I'm going to say one more time, if anybody has any questions, you can just put them in the comment section and we can answer them, but I don't see anything. So I'm going to say thank you so much, Emily. I really appreciated your time, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.